Welcome to everybody to this session on mental health. I'm really delighted to have Jacquie Bhana with us again today. After more than 35 years of working in some of the most successful local and global companies, Jacquie left the corporate world to do what she loves, developing people and seeing them grow and helping them to work towards their aspiration and become high-performing individuals. Jacquie has worked in various business sectors, including agriculture, financial services, engineering, automotive, and retail. And she's worked at a senior level in both marketing and human resource functions in management, executive, and non-executive roles. The experience that Jacquie has acquired involves development and facilitation on a range of leadership, management, skills training, and graduate programs. During this time, Jacquie's really discovered a passion for coaching and specifically for life coaching. And over the time that Jacquie's been working, she discovered that a real problem that people have is in mental health issues, which she has realized needs much attention. She's also done presentations at conferences and really feels that businesses and employees need to engage more robustly on this topic. So I'm going to hand over to Jacquie and we'll hear more about mental health from her. We'll leave all the questions to the end. And please, if you just drop them into the chat and I'll pick up on them as we go along. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much, Gail, for that introduction, and welcome everybody. I'm so delighted that you're showing an interest in this topic because it is a very big topic for business and for ourselves as individuals. Thanks also to all of you who phoned from all over the country and some beyond the borders of our country just to find out where's the link, you'd like your teams to join and so on. So I'm really hoping that you're all online and that I hope you are going to be able to take some nuggets of value from this presentation and help advance the agenda of dealing with this problem of mental health. It is a huge problem, as you will see as I go through the presentation. So I'm going to start by sharing the presentation. And you'll see from the title that it's called Nurturing Mental Health for Sustainable Success, the key here being sustainable, because it's not an issue or a problem that can be solved short term or overnight. It's something that I think we must commit ourselves to resolving, solving for the long term, because the future of work is dependent on employee well-being and mental health. And that's looking at business through a mental health lens. There are other very big business issues to attend to, but mental health, as you will realize as we walk through this presentation, it is a very big problem. And I think everybody on this webinar will be able to do something about it. When I used to do this presentation, I talk about less talk, more action, but I honestly realized less talk is not going to help us. We really need to talk more, and the stigma associated with mental health doesn't lend itself to that. So as we talk through the session, I think you'll all realize that we need to engage and talk more about it. So what are we going to cover? So my slides aren't moving. Okay, so what are we going to cover this morning? And we're going to finish this discussion in 1 hour. I don't think 1 hour will do this topic justice, but I think it will give you a flavor of what are some of the things you need to think about and what are some of the things you can do. So I'll start off with a bit of an introduction and context regarding mental health. And then, because depression and anxiety are the two most prevalent mental health conditions, I'm going to spend some time on that. We look at what is actually happening in business, because there's not nothing happening, but there could be more, and we'll talk about what are those. Then we look at, what are the benefits for business to focus on mental health issues for their employees. Then I think we all will never forget the world of COVID. It's not a distant memory. We are still suffering the after effects of that. So I'll talk a little bit about mental health post-COVID. We'll then look at some proposed solutions and then we'll end. I'd love to hear your questions at the end. So please let's try and get the most value out of this conversation. So maybe we should start off by talking about what is mental health. So, so mental health affects how we think, how we feel, and how we act, and helps determine how we handle stress, engage with others, and how we actually show up. And in the introduction, I think Grant had how do you appear as your best self? And I think our mental health helps us or talks to how we relate to others, make choices, and show up. It includes our emotional, our psychological, and social well-being. It becomes a mental illness as it disrupts our mental health state. Every day we don't wake up feeling our best selves. You may wake up feeling blue, down, irritated, but those don't don't lead, or it's not a definition. It's not about us having a mental health illness. That's simply our mental health being in a particular way out of balance, but it's not a mental health illness. When it gets really bad, when our emotions are disrupted, when we don't show up as our best selves, then it becomes a mental illness issue. So, why is it important to know about mental health? What have been the findings about mental health? And I've gotten a lot of these stats. There are mental health companies, societies, academic institutions. There's just a myriad of information on the internet, and you can go and look for some of them. But I thought what's relevant for today and for our topic are these findings that I put together, most of them taken from the South African Depression and Anxiety Group, and another taken from Mindful Resources, which is or the Mindful Revolution, which is a mixture of organizations that have done a bit of research. So, what is staggering, and what you may not know, or you may actually do know, that in South Africa, 1 in 4 people suffer from depression. Now, that is absolutely frightening. That, the person in which you share a room with or an office with could be suffering from depression. And the question is, are they showing up as their best selves? Do you recognize that? Could you deal with it proactively? Or are you just letting it go? Or do you not even notice it? The second one is even more staggering. For each person who commits suicide, 10 have attempted it, and a lot of it stems from depression. Now, I was with the South African Depression and Anxiety Group last week, and they were saying committing suicide is not the correct term. It has been changed. So it's called something else. It's not called suicide, but I thought, this group at this stage would understand it. But what was more frightening for me is the fact that out of 10 that have attempted it, one is actually being successful. Then you look at the UK, it is said that at least 30% of the UK workers have been diagnosed with a mental condition at some point. So it's not just in South Africa. Mental health and mental illness is a worldwide phenomenon and problem. So 80% of employees will come to work despite feeling depressed. So again, you might not know it, but that's the mental state of employees who come to work. The next point is also quite telling because the whole issue of presenteeism, where people actually do come to work but aren't productive, that costs South Africa in the region of about 200 million rands per annum. Then 75% of people who suffer from mental health refuse to get treatment because of the stigma that's attached to it. And then 26% don't disclose their mental health status because there's no support or guidance. I think these are frightening figures for us who live in this world where this situation exists. So, what is causing this poor mental health? These are some of the reasons that cause poor mental health. It is not exhaustive. I've really taken these because they talk to us in business and they talk to us on a practical level. So, the one thing that causes poor mental health is a very high workload. You know, with COVID having happened and people having left work, managers have had to make a plan and redistribute work with people that are in the roles, are in different roles, they take on new roles, and these individuals just cannot manage. A lot of them suffer from burnout, stress, fatigue, and exhaustion. Um, and that then causes poor mental health. The next thing is that managers then try to exercise control now over how work is done. How can they make sure that the deliverables that need to be executed actually do get done? And then often, not only they feel powerless and frustrated because that's what they need to do, but it's transferred onto the people who report to them. The next thing is a lack of support. So both managers, employees feel like there's just no support. They feel isolated, they feel neglected, and they feel that they just have to deliver. And I mean, as these changes take place, I know it's the last point. It's they you are going to need to think of how we support individuals, teams, managers with changes that take place. It cannot just be implemented. Um, Roles are quite important. If you look at the goals and values of the organization, what individuals thought about in terms of their roles in the beginning may have actually changed, and it may be in dissonance with what they were meant to be doing. So it's important to make sure that you look at which roles are conflicting. What are the responsibilities? Are they changing? Are you communicating this? Is there confusion? Are you clarifying what needs to be done? And I'm very cognizant, both of employees and managers in this case. Then relationships can also descend on being hostile. When things aren't going right, people resort to, getting the job done in any possible way. And hostile relationships can result in toxicity and lack of respect. And I worked very closely with a professional who worked in a terribly hostile relationship. And we eventually concluded that through a process of coaching interventions, she found a new role and she's much better off. And then, of course, change is happening so fast, so unpredictably. With the fourth industrial revolution, with AI, with technology, people in their roles are uncertain. They may not be as productive. They may need development. So, these are a number of factors that I thought we could identify with that could give us a sense of what is actually causing some of these problems and that we aren't actually ourselves going mad, that it's actually very real. So if we look at how do mental health disorders manifest at work, so when all of this happens and people go through this basket of emotions, they feel high levels of anxiety, they feel high levels of depression, and we've seen that these depressive states can lead to suicide. Then they resort to addictive measures, alcoholism being one of them. There are prescription drugs. It's just easy to be taken that'll help us cope. There's also eating disorders, which we don't think about, but it could really present itself in eating badly and then putting on weight, getting unhealthy, and so on. And then we also could end up psychotic. um, Finally, and these also are not exhaustive, there are many conditions in the DSM, in the register for mental illness, but I thought these are relevant to us. But this last point for me is just it's very close to my heart because it's something that I think we can all do something about if we are aware of it. So loneliness is not really about being isolated. Loneliness is about feeling lonely, and you can even feel lonely in a room full of people. You can feel lonely as a family member with your family. You can feel lonely in many situations where there are many people. But that feeling is just it's something that I think many of us can do something about for other people. All right. And I felt that this would be a good time to share a very short video on loneliness. And I hope it helps give you some sense of the impact of loneliness.
It was a forensic psychologist for the San Francisco Police Department, Jerome Motto. He did an interview in the New Yorker magazine. And he spoke about the fact that he used to do the forensic work when people would jump off the Golden Gate Bridge. Unfortunately, it's very common. And he would have to prove there's no foul play. How did he do that? He was a psychologist, but the person had already jumped. You can't interview them exactly at that point. He would have to retrace their steps and prove that they were, God forbid, in the frame of mind where they wanted to take their own life. So basically, it was to go and look at people's history and their background to see what happened right before they jumped. So he said he got so used to this. He saw so many hundreds of jumpers that he became numb to it. He said there was one story that shook him and he could never shake it loose. He said one night they found a jumper and they found ID. They went back to the guy lived. They found an address. They walk into the house. They found a note on the dresser. He said, I've seen that 100 times, a note on a dresser, nothing new. But then I read the note and it completely shook me to my core. It said, I'm walking to the bridge now. If one person stops me on the way and says hello, I'm turning around and coming home. Do not underestimate the fact that you can be that person for somebody else. You can be the one who cares. You can be the one who reaches out to somebody else. To the world, you may be one person, but to one person, you may be the world. It was a.
Okay, so it's quite a telling statement. To one person, you may be the world, and you could be that person that is able to tap into that person's world and make them feel a lot better, make them feel a lot better about life. So I'm not going to spend too much of time on that video, but loneliness is a very big problem in our society. I worked with a number of people who are lonely and who are really experiencing a tough time. So if we look at the whole concept of depression and anxiety moving on, it has been said that by 2030, 80% of people will be struggling with depression and anxiety. And I think for all of us here, it is important to internalize that number. 80% of people will be struggling with depression and anxiety. So, what is the impact of that? They're not just words. If people are feeling depressed, what happens? Number one, it affects relationships. Now, you might not want to engage with somebody who's depressed because they're negative, they're sad, and so on. At the same time, they don't want to be communicating with you. I had a manager I worked with a few years ago, and he said, "Oh, I just don't want to deal with this lady's problems. We have deliverables, and she needs to put her personal issues aside and get on with her work." So it affected his relationship with her. At the same time, it affected her relationship with him. But in general, if somebody is depressed, it will affect their relationship with people around them. At work, and if you are studying, it affects your performance because you are really not in your best frame of mind. You don't think straight. You can't show up as your best self. So when you come to work and you don't show up as your best self, your capability decreases and you don't perform. So obviously that has a number of implications. And then sometimes you just don't feel good enough to go to work and then you take leave. And we'll talk about leave days because that's how we in business uh, deal with people costs. And then, of course, if there are promotions, pending promotions, and you are in line for that, if you aren't performing because you are depressed, obviously it will affect your chances of getting a promotion. So I think for me also one of the biggest issues, and this figure came through the South African Depression and Anxiety Group about stigma, that 90% of people, 19% of people fear reporting depression at work because of the great stigma attached to it. I think it's important that we come to terms with this whole concept of stigma because it is one of the areas we could potentially work on. Okay, so who takes responsibility for all this? The World Health Organization did research and they found that poor mental health globally costs companies trillions of rands in lost productivity because of depression. In South Africa, it costs companies around 200 million rands a year. Now, this is a big issue. Would you rather then attend to the depressive issues and the problems of mental health than have that present in your business performance? So often this problem is handed to HR. I worked in HR, so I know that I worked quite hard. We tried to get interventions going and help where it was needed, but it is actually not an HR issue. It is a business issue. And that's how we need to see it. It cannot be sent to the HR department or the HR officer or the HR team to deal with. There needs to be a strategy, a business strategy to deal with how you deal with mental health and depression. So, what is happening in business? The one is that I mentioned that disclosure is an issue because of stigmatization and shame. And this is it's a pet topic for me that managers themselves have difficulty dealing with this. They feel they don't have good support. Only 25% of managers in in the research, it was found that only 25% of managers feel they have good support. That's a very low number, which means 75% of managers feel they don't. They don't feel comfortable due to a lack of resources. I mean, if somebody's is mentally ill, how do they deal with it? They don't have resources, they don't have guidance. So there is a strong need to develop tools, guidance, and coaching for managers to help them to deal with this confidently. So more than 1 in 10 people don't know how to react when they have a mental problem. And when I talked about people taking time off, 80% of those who take time off don't disclose that it's due to a mental problem. And actually, most of the managers don't know that mental health or a mental issue, a depressive or anxiety state, is the cause of them not being at work, because they really aren't going to disclose that. So that leaves employees feeling unsupported and unheard. So, very definitely, there needs to be a shift in the culture at work to create safe spaces to encourage dialogue. Okay, so some companies do have employee assistance programs, and there are some very good employee assistance programs around and available. So, when there was some research done on accessing company services, which are employee assistance programs, and some of you on this webinar may actually have employee assistance programs in place. In one of the companies I worked for, only 4% of employees used those assistance programs. It was frightening. So, when it comes to accessing those services, 39% of employees said they don't. They just don't. 17% said, well, they do. 28% don't know about it. And then there's the 19% that fear discrimination if they disclose. And that's pretty scary. So on the one hand, business have introduced an intervention. On the other hand, this is the level of usage. So somewhere there seems to be a gap. Okay, so how do we destigmatize mental health? And how do we start dealing with the way people react to what's available to them? So firstly, awareness programs are really important. You can introduce an EAP, an employee assistance program, but I think there needs to be some kind of education and awareness, demystifying the use of that, and helping open discussion and removing the mystery surrounding mental health problems. I'm sure a lot of you have parents or friends or people that you know of, or even yourselves. You might think that I cannot disclose this, I cannot discuss this, because there's a perception that if you have a mental health problem, when I sat in on a program with a group one day, the feedback was that generally people think you're crazy if you have a mental health problem, or if you disclose that you have a problem. The other thing that businesses, communities can do is share platforms to create spaces to share experiences. And I attended a workshop or seminar once, and there was a lady who shared her personal experience, and there was such power in that, because there was it personalized this concept of mental health, that to the extent that it wasn't just a concept or a term, it was a real thing. So we need to normalize those mental health conversations. I must say there's some young individuals that I engage with, and they're a lot more open about talking about mental health. One talks openly about a depression and a therapy. And then I worked with a number of students on bursary schemes funded by an organization, and a lot of them struggled with transitioning from communities in in poor communities, then moving into residences and living on their own. It was a very frightening experience for them. So they found it a little bit normal to talk about mental health, whereas in general, I found that people were more comfortable talking about it in confidence. Then I think what might be useful is for businesses to do regular check-ins and have regular surveys, because even though there's an anonymity that's associated with it, what you'll be able to do is have a sense of the extent of this problem in your organization. And then what you can do is plan for accessible resources and support. Now, it has been found in some research that 80% of businesses are prepared to invest in um, mental health. I think we're at a point where we need to physically get going. All right. There's a very big role for leadership to play in mental health advocacy. And I was just so surprised one day. I met a student who was doing a in-service training, and they started a workshop quite late. And she said, well, that's because our manager actually went for counseling for his depression. And that was quite a surprise for me, and pleasantly so, because if the manager was open about his counseling, then it makes it easier for the rest to go for counseling and disclose their status. And there needs to be transparencies, and very important, you need to have supportive policies, because once you have those policies, you declare your commitment to mental health. Okay, so I thought it might be useful just to outline some of the activities that are taking place in business. And there's a really nice article written by the Mindful Revolution where they gave some examples of things that businesses are doing. So in Japan, there was an 80% drop in absence due to depression because they implemented workplace measures very effectively. So they then enjoyed better mental health and an increase in productivity. One of my favorites is training that was done at Heathrow. So they developed a program for managers, which I loved the title. The title was called Your Mind Matters, and this was for managers. So the three modules that it covered was, firstly, creating a positive psychological environment. Now that's not, it sounds like rah-rah psychology stuff, but it's important. How do you create a positive psychological, emotional environment for workers? I love the second one, how to catch somebody before they fall. So you need to be in tune. There needs to be a connection with individuals, and you need to recognize when things are getting a little bit iffy. And then the third one was on how then do you help them return to work. So that was the Heathrow program. Then there were some studies by Deloitte, and they had insights on mental health, which concluded if it's good for our people, it's good for our business. Isn't that amazing? So we need to build future fit leaders. Again, my pet topic. We need to build skills, qualities, and approaches, and we need to anticipate and adapt to trends. So this point really disturbed me, but it's true, and it's factual. South Africa is regarded the worst in the world regarding relationships between managers and employees. And in the World Competitiveness Report, they scored 137th out of 137 countries when it comes to relationships between managers and employees. And I think there's a very big job for us to do to build that relationship between managers and employees. All right, so leaders influence what's going to be happening. So the first one I'd like to talk about is bringing heart into the business. There are more and more articles about leading with heart, compassion, kindness. So there's a phrase that was coined called compassionomics. How do you build compassion into a business? The second one is to create a culture of care and trust. You need to think about what is going to be your workplace narrative. One of the executives that I spoke to said that it's just that I don't have time to prioritize my mental well being. I've got to do all these other things. So if you're not mentally fit, how can you be the best person for your employees, for people you lead? So we need to create organizational purpose. We need to know what our purpose is, and we need to create a growth mindset. Okay, then some of you might remember the third bottom line when businesses were talking about triple bottom line, and that third bottom line was called ESG. It focused on the environment, on society, and governance. And we know that's quite well entrenched at the moment because governance is being given quite a lot of attention and focus. And they do report on ESG in their annual reports. But it's being said now that well-being is the fourth bottom line. So it's very important that we start focusing on well-being. Okay. Because we can't afford not to invest in well-being. Like we've invested in ESG, we are going to need to invest in well-being, and well-being needs now to become a strategic objective. And it has also been said that mental health, hear this, is going to be the next pandemic. So even though it's not on our doorsteps, it actually is very close, and I think we need to be mindful of that. So what's happened to mental health post-COVID? We know mental health was around, the topic was around, businesses looked after mental health in some way in their businesses. So before COVID, that was being done. But COVID has actually made it a priority. Right. There has been a staggering increase in COVID-linked depression and anxiety across the globe, and many people have had some levels of anxiety, loneliness, there it is, isolation, burnout, and absolute fear of job loss. So it is for that reason, it's like you could be like a hamster on a wheel. You just carry on and carry on because you're afraid of losing your job. There's new technology, there's fourth industrial revolution, and so on. So it's like a no-win battle. So the nature of work is changing. So it's critical for employers to review their approach to mental health to help employees build resilience. I've heard that in some schools in Joburg, they teach resilience as a subject. We need to stop being reactive, and we need to build prosilience and turn away from reactiveness. So, what has actually started off as a sprint has turned into a long and painful marathon, bringing with it brand new challenges. Some people still suffer from long COVID. All right, so there's been some research, and I got this information from the MD of ICAS, that's an EAP company, a really good EAP company. And I was intrigued by this information. She said jobs of the future we need to think about. 50% of jobs are going to disappear, and 50% are going to be automated, and there are going to be new jobs and new skills. And what are some of those jobs? I mean, well-being directors. Now, at the moment, we might have HR people who are responsible for health and welfare. But I think it's going to be all-encompassing, or well-being directors will be separate simply because of the cost to the business. So if it's taking on a strategic position and it is, the fourth pandemic, then we need to invest time and energy strategy in it. I was quite intrigued by this job as the chief of happiness, looking at being a well-being data analyst. I think that's quite common at the moment with data analytics. Often we look at information on absence and that impact on the business's bottom line. Because people with mental health problems struggle to sleep, some people are employing sleep coaches. With the advent of COVID, remember we all wore masks and kids all wore masks. So children never had a sense of what smiles looked like. So there are now jobs for smile specialists. There are virtual and remote well-being professionals. I think that's quite common. Well-being technical experts, and then a resilience specialist. I mentioned that resilience is even taught at school. So here are some issues for both employers and employees. And I think what's important is that it's not just an employer problem. I think employees also need to be proactive in solutions, in finding solutions, in suggesting solutions for business. So the first one is that certain workplace factors negatively affect mental health. I did unpack some of those in early on in the presentation, but I think in your businesses, in your places of work, it's important to identify those and address those. And there are many ways you can do those through surveys, focus groups, engagements, town halls, etc. There needs to be an increase in investment in employee health. And what we found, what the research has found, is that companies, business really generally are prepared to increase the investment. The challenge is now, how do we execute? We need to build deeper connections. Human beings are social beings. The brain is a social organ. And despite the fact that digitization has really helped this world advance, helped us to connect at a different level. I mean, webinars weren't that common before COVID. Before COVID, having Teams and Zoom meetings weren't as prevalent as they are now, and that has just opened up the world. But what has happened with that is that there's a lack of connection between people. So we need to start looking at, well, how do we deal with this lack of connection with our employees? Are they getting more isolated? How do we deal with it? How can we make it better? We need to educate, support, and encourage employees. And by employees, I mean both managers and employees, right? Then we need to create an enabling environment, create a safe space, and create a space where there's psychological safety, where people can voice new thinking. Okay. Employees, I said, they also have a role to play. They need to participate in company programs. There's some employees who sit back and criticize, but they need to actively engage in these programs. They need to help at looking at improving these programs and then take personal steps when it involves them. Okay, so for the first time, in many years, there are 5 generations in one workplace. Can you imagine? Baby boomers, currently in their 60s and generally tending to be the like top level managers, generally. And then you have Generation Z, your younger generation just out of school, your tech wizards who where mental health and the environment is much more important. So that can bring real stress into a workplace, because how do you manage all these people who've been brought up in different environments, who have different expectations? So it's important that as we try and, well, we spend a huge amount of money on recruiting talent, the important thing here is, how do we retain talent? And what I found with some of the work I've done with younger employees is that I really help them to coach upwards. I get them to help me on the generational things and on the technological side, and it's worked extremely well. So this I just found quite an important slide to show an important concept, because it ties it all up, ties it together, and I thought you'd find it might be quite profound for you. They talk about the masks that we wear. So all of us come to work, or we live our lives with masks. Some people wear masks in a relationship to maintain the peace. Some people wear masks at work so that they aren't vulnerable. So, it's very important to know that people are not showing up as their real selves. They're showing up as someone else, which isn't them, and it's there for a reason. So we need to listen carefully for signals. They say before people take their lives, they send messages many times. And I think we need to be alive to some of that. You walk past people in the morning and you say good morning, and they barely greet. There's barely a connection. You don't really know. So it's important just to change our tack and be a little more mindful of people and where they are. All right, so we need to listen carefully for signals. What are people saying? How are they acting? They could be telling you something. All right. Be aware of the false reassurance of the smile. Those smiles can be shrouded in silent struggles. So try and be aware of that. Appearance, the way somebody presents, is less helpful a diagnostic tool than we have been led to believe. Okay, so how someone looks is very difficult to diagnose what the reality is unless we tune into that. And then just this last point, by the time mental health is outwardly obvious, where people just cannot take it anymore, it's probably very, very bad. And I think, it's just important for me to say that when you build others up, you increase your own height of greatness. I think we must remember that. So in conclusion, there's a lot of action that we can take. We may not be able to take action in every possible thing where we'd like to. It may require costs, resources, and so on. But let's do something. Organizations are really just buildings and machinery. People have a role to play. So we don't really need to boil the ocean. We really should try and do what's possible in our environment. Let's try and make a difference there, a difference with our colleagues, our parents, our friends. Let's try and make a difference to that team that's closest to us. And remember that saving one life can make a difference. And I'm going to end off with more talk. There needs to be more talk and then more action, because really there is no health or wealth without mental health. All right. And thank you very much for listening. I hope you found that useful.
Thank you, Jacquie. That really was interesting and insightful, and I think a real wake-up call. We're so often involved in our own daily lives that we don't look at the people around us and what's happening in their lives. And I think you also really stress the importance of connection and just trying to connect with the people around us, even on a daily basis. As you say, it can be a simple hello or smile, but it can make a real difference to somebody else's day and well-being. We have a couple of questions. I'll read the first one. Does making it more normal for mental health issues in business not allow for more people to take advantage of the system? As most of the working class, the job is a means to an end. How do you prevent this from happening without taking away from the individuals with a real problem with mental illness?
Thanks, Gail. I think that's a very good question. And I think often businesses don't take action because something might happen. So they don't do something good because somebody's going to take advantage of it. But remember, mental health is a real problem. The stats indicate that it is a real problem. So I understand that problem exactly, where somebody might take advantage and pretend to be whatever. But if you have policies in place, for example, if someone's not if someone's experiencing mental issues, you can refer them to a therapist, a coach. There are organizations like Lifeline and SADAG. Get a first responder to deal with that person. Some of those services are even free. And then from there, they can be forwarded, referred on, depending on the seriousness of the problem. So I think when it comes to mental health, there are people who might take a chance. But I think as business, it's our responsibility to responsibly and we need to commit to deal with it in the best possible way. So, yes, it's possible, but I think how we manage it is quite important. It's better than not having actions in place.
Great, thanks for that, Jackie. You mentioned anxiety and depression. Can you just perhaps explain the difference between the two?
Okay, so depression is when somebody feels really sad all of the time to a point that they can't function. All right. And then they need to be referred to a professional. So a doctor will deal with it and they'll diagnose it and so on. Even your counselors at your lifelines and SADA can deal with it. Anxiety is when you feel anxious all the time to a point that you can't function. So something might trigger it. There might be a death, an accident, something really bad might happen. It may cause anxiety, and this might carry on for a prolonged period of time. So, and then you will need some form of help, medication, therapy, and so on. So, depression is when you experience sadness, anxiety is when you feel uncomfortable, irritable, anxious.
Great, thank you for that. You spoke a lot about the importance of connection and being aware. If you see and you note that an employee at work is struggling, how do you start to have that well-being conversation?
Okay, that's a very interesting question, and it's a very good question because remember at work, our colleagues are colleagues, and sometimes you don't want to overstep. Um, but I think the world is changing. If you notice that somebody isn't themselves, and generally you do, my view is that it wouldn't cause any harm to recognize that somebody is not feeling well, and then maybe you can deal with it. I go for sports coaching, and one day my coach said to me, Jackie, is something wrong today? Are you tired? And my feedback and I really was feeling weird. I can't even describe what that feeling was. And I said to him, actually, I'm amazed you noticed it, but thanks for noticing it because I'm really out of sorts. Um, and yeah, no, I'm not in my best. I'm not here as my best self. I was so appreciative that he saw that. And he's not my friend. We have a coaching professional relationship. So I think that, it's not based on my experience only, but I think if you'd rather do something and say something rather than not do something. So, it's like feedback. If you give somebody often we don't like to give honest feedback, but if you take somebody aside and dig deep and take the courage to tell them, they may be angry, but they appreciate that honesty and courage. So that would be my view. I don't think you must just leave it because it could be so absolutely serious. And as people, when they're depressed, they don't come out of their shell. They're not going to raise that issue immediately. I think they would need some help. So my view is reach out.
I agree. I think it really gives the person the space then to start the conversation. Even if they don't at that time, they still feel that someone has taken notice of them, and it's not just showing up, but there's awareness that there could be a problem, and how could they go forward.
Yes, yeah.
And Jackie, we mentioned at the very beginning that you have a real passion for coaching, and this is obviously a subject in which you have a great interest. How, if someone came to you for mental wellness coaching, how would you take this process forward?
Well, I mean, I get a number of people phoning me via WhatsApp or contacting me via my website, which is, I think it may be on the presentation or on the screen. I think, we have an initial meeting, we chat about it, and then we talk about how we plan a way forward. It is the most rewarding thing for me to be helping somebody in this space, because it's, it, it is like a helping hand and a lifeline to them, because in my presentation, I talked about the fear of disclosure, stigmatization, and so on. So I've had people from companies who do have EAP programs who actually have contacted me despite the fact that they have those programs. And I think it's because of the anonymity, and so I love working with them because I see such great success as we deal with this, because you can completely deal with it. You can completely talk about it. You can completely open up about it. And I work with Lifeline as well. They provide um, coaching, and not coaching, counseling. So there's a lot of help for individuals. At SADAG, they used to get about 600 calls a day, right? So that's the depression and anxiety group. During coaching, those calls shot up to over 2,000 a day. There are people that just need help. So this webinar is a call to organizations to help. And then also, if you need help from my side, I'm available.
That's great. So for everybody listening, if you yourself really believe that you need assistance, or if you have anyone in your sphere of influence, ranging from family, friends to employees, please feel free to chat with Jackie, reach out to her. Her contact details will be available on screen. We'll share them at the end of the session. And this webinar will also be posted onto Jackie's website and onto social media pages, so that you can go back and refer to it at a later stage, because there's a wealth of information and it's something worthwhile going back through. I will certainly be listening again. So thank you for that, Jackie. Is there anything else that you would like to add in closing?
No, I just want to thank you all for listening, and I'm hoping that there'll be some positive change in your organizations, in your communities, in your churches, in your teams, because again, there's no wealth or health without mental health. Really, you got to believe that. We need to fix it up. For me, the difficulty with mental health is, doctors treat patients, they give them stitches and then it heals, and it's visible, it's obvious. But when it comes to mental health, it's a little bit more difficult for all of us to see and deal with. So we have to use our senses, and mindfulness, care, and try and deal with it from that point of view, because it's not always that obvious to anybody, and people are not going to talk about it.
Thank you very much, Jackie, for those closing words. And thank you for your time today, as well as thank you to everybody for attending. We really appreciate your time. Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone. And thank you, Gail and Grant, for putting this together.
Pleasure. Thanks, Jackie.
Okay, bye.